Welcome to the KBA Vendor Viewpoint podcast, where we bring together Kentucky bankers and the industry's top vendor solutions to discuss important topics that affect your bank. Here's your host, KBA Director of Membership, Products, and Services, Selina Parrish.
Today we are featuring Compliance Alliance, KBA's partner who supports all of our KBA members with compliance tools and resources. With me today is Scott Daugherty, President of Compliance Alliance. Thank you so much, Scott, for spending some time with us today. Tell our audience about your role with Compliance Alliance.
Yes, thank you, Selena. I always enjoy being here with you. My role at Compliance Alliance, as you said, I am the president of the company. When we started this about 15 years ago after the passage of Dodd-Frank, I helped get this started. We kind of started it down in Texas to try to help our community banks, and then it very quickly rolled out across the country. Today, we're owned by 38 state bankers associations. I'm very happy to say Kentucky Bankers is one of those.
Thank you.
Every state has a seat on our board, so generally, either yourself or Ballard or Tim represent the KBA at our board meetings and votes on behalf of the KBA and your banks. So I'm very, very happy with that. And the last thing I would just say for your bank's benefits is I've recently moved from Texas back to Kentucky. So I am now back as a Kentucky resident.
That's wonderful. Welcome back to Kentucky. It's great to have you. And that makes it even more convenient for us to get to you. We know where you are now. Right,
yes,
right in Paducah.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. Oh my goodness. Well, while I'm on the road visiting banks, there's always some hot topics going on. And artificial intelligence is definitely a hot topic for KBA members right now. Can you tell our audience how Compliance Alliance is providing tools and resources for banks who are looking to add AI?
Absolutely. It is a very hot topic, and as I'm sure you've seen, I see so many companies out there touting AI. I mean, some are relying almost exclusively on AI,
sure,
which is very scary to me. One of the first things I will say is we have an AI toolkit. So we have policies, procedures, all kinds of tools that can help a bank dealing with AI. So I would say, first thing for those that are members of Compliance Alliance is go look at those resources and tools. We have some webinars on AI. We've also put out a couple of conferences dealing with AI. These are like 12-hour conferences that deal in like a use case. We've talked to banks that have implemented a lot of AI and how they've done it. We've had vendors that have also talked about like how they're incorporating it. So we have these resources that are available for our members. So I would say first go out and use that. The second thing I would say is we also have our hotline service where banks can call and ask questions. So if they run into something, for compliance officers, like my CEO asked me about, can we do ABC, and it's dealing with AI and they're not sure, reach out and talk to us because we can also help them work through like specific situations. So those resources are really out there for that benefit. We also have our review service. So if they are looking at a new policy that deals with AI, they can kind of reach out to our review team and help walk through that new product to make sure everything is there. Because AI is a very daunting area, and it's also changing very fast. What we have today, we didn't have 6 months ago, and I suspect in 6 months it'll be completely different yet again.
Certainly. And it seems like the banks are in that phase of not really knowing what the regulators are going to ask when their next exam cycle comes up. So it's almost like, how do we get prepared for the next exam, not knowing what the regulators are even going to ask us about AI?
Yes. And unfortunately, they don't even know what they're going to ask us yet.
Yeah. Yeah. See, we're all learning about this together. So that makes it an interesting journey together. But it sounds like you all have definitely got a great foundation for where the banks can reach out for all that AI tools and resources. Thank you. And what is one compliance area that banks may be underestimating?
The one right now that's really at the top of my mind, and this is kind of going along with the whole AI and technology piece of it, is, and it's really vendor management. And I know you deal with this
Okay.
a lot with what you do with KBA, but there are so many vendors using AI that often the banks don't even know they're using it.
Sure.
And so banks are
Okay.
using, like I've talked to bankers and CEOs that say, our bank doesn't use any AI. And I was like, you do, you just don't know it
Yeah.
because you don't know which vendors maybe have put it into their tools and resources. You don't know which of your employees might be going out there and using Chat GP or Claude or something like that to ask it questions. Quite frankly, if you do a Google search, one of the first things that comes up is their AI answer. So
Hmm.
they're using it whether they know it or not. And from a vendor management standpoint, that can be a problem. We suspect, although we don't know, but in our conversations with regulators, one of their concerns is AI, how banks are using it, and whether they understand how they're using it. Because AI is new and it's getting better every day. But if you go out to Chat GPT and ask the similar question 3 times, you get 3 different answers.
Okay.
And that's a problem because which one's the right answer. And I joke because I used to be a lender, and I'm like, if I was a lender and I wanted an answer that says yes, you can do this loan, I could word the question to get that answer.
Wow.
And that's the problem. AI can create what they call hallucinations, where it thinks it's giving you the right information, but it may not be.
Hmm.
And a lot of companies are putting it in, and they're putting safeguards in place for that. But that's something the bank needs to be asking their vendors. And for instance, Compliance Alliance, we are using AI to help make our team more efficient. But what we are doing is, instead of saying like, oh, you can ask a question of our chatbot, is you ask a question to our person, and they do follow-up questions to make sure they know what the real issue is. But AI will go out and search through the regulations and look at that, but it gives the information back to the person then to craft their answer. So you're not getting an AI answer, it's just assisting the person.
Okay.
Um, but that's something where, we feel very strongly we need the person in the loop, the human in the loop,
Hmm.
because AI isn't perfect yet. It's getting better. But that's something where, the bank needs to ask, like, ask their vendors, how are you using AI? What are the safeguards? Because one thing the regulators may ask them is, what are the biases in your AI? And with your vendors, you are going to have a hard time getting that information from them. But
Sure.
regulators have always been very much about what is the bias in this scenario or in your processes, because they don't like bias. So they're gonna ask that question more than likely to find out what those biases are and how the bank, what steps are taken to overcome those things.
Okay. Yeah. So many dotting the I's and crossing the T's to make sure that
Absolutely.
we know what's going on with that vendor relationship. How can a bank's leadership team and board better support the compliance function?
And I think this is a great question because compliance is often thought of as, those people that sit off in the back room and just tell us
Hmm.
no all the time.
Sure. Yep.
When I used to go around and do a lot of speaking, I always said, if your compliance officer just says no, you ask the wrong question. I think what the leadership team can do is think about it from a standpoint of compliance is here to help us. They're not trying to get in our way. They're not trying to be a roadblock. They're just trying to make sure the bank stays on the right path and stays out of trouble and document everything. Um,
Mm.
compliance officers are big about documentation. Our kind of joke is, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen.
Yes.
So, let them document the scenario that's going on, because if it blows up, at least you can tell the regulators we understood the risk. We documented the risk. We just it worst case scenario came about.
Hmm.
I think the other thing is leadership can give resources to the compliance officer. I talk to so many banks, and when I go around the convention, I was like, "Oh, how big is your bank?" And they'll tell me, and I can usually guess how big their compliance department is, and because it's there's a very much of a pattern. And for our smaller community banks, they have one person, and that person's usually also BSA and security and maybe IT and a couple other hats.
Sure.
It's hard to do all those things well. So, one thing I would say is, give them training, send them to, KBA events to get training and learn more because they've got so much going on. They need those resources. And often if they're the only compliance person, they don't have someone else to talk to in the bank. So, getting to those events, at KBA and around there, if there's like a regional compliance meetings or something, that they are important because that's the peers that they can reach out to ask things and bounce ideas off of them.
Mhm.
In a bank, they may have 5 lenders, but 1 compliance officer. Lenders have people to talk to. The compliance officer often is kind of on an island by themselves. So giving them that support, resources they need to stay up to date, and everything. So that's what I would say is the biggest thing that could help the compliance people.
Definitely networking. I know just connecting with others that are in that situation can just bring peace of mind sometimes to make sure they're doing what
Absolutely.
others are also working on.
Yeah.
Fraud and scams. Oh my goodness. This just continues to be a huge issue for all of our banks. What should banks be watching most closely?
It's sad because I've been in banking for a long, long time, and fraud and scams still are around. They don't go away. The bad actors just come up with new ways to take advantage of people. I think the biggest thing, and this is where it gets harder for banks because we don't have as many people walking in lobbies as we used to.
Mhm.
In the old days, the tellers really did a great job of watching out for, an elderly customer that might be getting scammed. But people don't walk in the bank like they used to. So it becomes much more difficult, but it's still, those relationships, and sadly, it's still a lot of times picking on senior citizens because they do seem to target, that demographic more than others. So I think it's just watching for those folks if they're doing anything that looks out of norm for them. The big one we're seeing, one big one we're seeing is dating scams where,
Okay.
that senior loses a spouse and they're lonely, so they get out on the internet, which is kind of the thing to do, I guess now, and they start talking to someone thinking, it could be something, and next thing you know, they're wiring $100,000 to somebody. And often we get calls from banks that see this and know what's going on. The problem is you can't convince that person they're being taken advantage of. It's really hard to do.
Mhm.
So I think, watching for those, wire transfers from someone that's never made one before, someone coming in and withdrawing large sums of cash, because we've seen, where people are like, oh, we'll send someone by your house to pick up $20,000. It's like,
Mhm.
no,
Right.
don't do that. I think the other thing, for banks to do is try to be proactive on educating their customers so that if they can, talk to them about these things before it happens, maybe they will see it as it's happening, or at least be more open. We've had banks that have had, law enforcement come in and sit down with the customer, and they're just like, no, I want you to do this, and I understand what I'm doing. Unfortunately, once they do get scammed and they run out of money, then their family comes in, well, how could the bank let this happen?
Mhm. It's terrible.
So the banks are really in the bad situation because they're ultimately you can't do anything to stop the person.
Mhm.
If they insist on giving the money away, you can't stop them. It's their money. But I think watching for those unusual transaction, large wires, really any wires that the person's never sent one. But that's a big one, or large cash withdrawals that the person normally only withdraws $200 or $300 at a time, and they're coming in asking for 20,000 in cash. That's obviously a huge
Yeah.
red flag.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sure sounds like
if they
it.
say they met someone online, that would be another big red flag because, if it's a 20-year-old, that's probably not a big deal. If they're an 80-year-old, kind of, would say, well, how did you meet somebody online?
Yes.
And is this person really, the person you're talking to? Because usually it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great tips. And how does Compliance Alliance stay current with all the regulatory changes and communicate them out to your Compliance Alliance member banks?
Yeah, and I think this is the biggest thing with compliance is staying up on everything that's going on.
Sure.
Regulatory changes are probably the easiest because you can kind of do RSS feeds and things from the regulators to track those, but then you got to track, court cases and guidance and what's going on in exams and all those. There's just so many areas where this information comes from. And I'm fortunate, we have a team of about 75 compliance professionals that are able to help with this. And this is part of what we'd like to bring to our banks is we've got 75 people out here helping you keep up on all this stuff. We
Mhm.
then push it out through, daily emails, our weekly newsletter, our monthly magazine. We push information out to, the SBAs like the KBA, so you can tell your banks if you haven't already. But often you guys are right there with us. But we may write an article about a specific topic and then push it out to you guys to get to your
Mhm.
members. So we really push it out multiple ways. We also do a podcast and talk about compliance issues. We have a compliance minute where we spend about 2 or 3 minutes on a really hot topic.
Uh-huh.
So we try to find as many ways as we can. The other really good one for the compliance officers is our huddle we have every month.
Oh,
Uh,
that sounds
this
good.
is where we have all the compliance officers can get on and talk to each other. They tell us what they want to talk about. We kind of guide it to keep it somewhat on topic. We recently expanded that to 90 minutes. It was 60 minutes. All the compliance officers that were involved asked for it to be longer, so we've gone to 90 minutes now, and we're already considering pushing it out to 2 hours. But that's a really good way because you can ask, other compliance officers. We usually have about 250 to 300 on that call every month. And, you can each say, what did you guys see in your last exam? Who's had an exam? What did they
Mhm.
do? You can ask about vendors. You can ask, have you ever had this situation? And hear from other banks that have dealt with it. And that's probably one of the most important ways to me because it's a way to network with your peers. And I think that's, as we discussed earlier, that's just a huge advantage for a compliance officer.
Yeah, I would think getting that heads up on what to expect on my next exam, if someone's just wrapped up a big compliance exam, it would be like, oh my goodness, yes. What compliance challenges are especially relevant to community banks when you compare them with the larger institutions?
And this kind of dovetails on our previous question and conversation. I think, there's so much for a compliance officer to keep up with. If you're at a large bank, you've got maybe a team of 10, 20, 30 compliance officers.
Sure.
That are smaller community banks, you've got one, two, or three. And that's just, you still have to comply with all the same regulations, do pretty much all the same work. I think it's just that massive overload that, compliance officers are facing. And again, it's also that networking piece. They're not able to bounce ideas off of each other as much. Um, and at a smaller bank, they're usually also more involved, which is a good thing in management at the bank. So they're involved in more meetings and they're, in the board meetings often. They're talking to senior leaders. That's a great thing from the standpoint of keeping the compliance culture in the bank, but it also takes their time away from actually doing the compliance work. So I think that's a challenge for them, and that they're at a large bank, they're not being asked to go to the board meeting, or one person's going to, if they have a chief risk officer, they're going. The others can keep doing work. At a small bank, they're getting pulled away from the compliance task often to do these other things, which are super important for the bank. Helps the culture of the bank from a compliance standpoint tremendously. But I do think that's a challenge for the banks because large banks have many more people doing it. Small bank, you're getting pulled away, and
Sure.
that would kind of go back to what resources can a bank give is that help of like, hey, maybe we can have somebody help them a little bit with some tasks that don't require quite as much expertise as far as compliance goes.
Yeah. And if there was one hot question, what should Kentucky bankers be asking their in-house compliance officers right now? Is there a certain hot topic that bankers all need to be aware of when working with the compliance team?
I think there's several. I would say most compliance officers, if their CEO or executive team would just go and say, "What could I do to help you?" They
Good
would
point.
love that. That's not a hot topic, but that would
Yeah,
open that discussion of like, well, what do you need? What can the bank give you that will help you? Not a hot topic, but I would say that would make them very happy to get asked that question.
sure.
As far as hot kind of areas, BSA continues to be a big area of concern, both for the regulators and banks.
Okay.
I think the other big concern that a lot of compliance people have is, we're seeing these huge swings in pendulum when it goes from, far left, far right, when it comes to, regulations. We had a lot of regulations going on 2 years ago that today aren't. The real concern there is like, well, what happens when it swings back the other way? Are we going to be in a bad position? I actually saw a news article today about CFPB that they tried to kill it. They tried to take it away. Now they're actually bringing them all back into the office, which I actually think is to get rid of most of them. But, because they're requiring them, no matter where they live, to come into the office in DC.
Yeah.
So that's probably not a good sign for those people that live, all across the country. But, I think that uncertainty is always a concern. Compliance officers, we'd like to have certainty. We want to know what we have to do so we can do it. And right now there's just a lot of uncertainty about, what is the expectations when our next exam happens, maybe in 18 months or 24 months, what are they going to be looking at? Because are we doing it today? Because, everything could change in the next 18 or 24 months.
It sure could. Yes, for sure. And as we wrap up, what is the best way for KBA members to get started with Compliance Alliance or just make better use of the resources that you provide?
Absolutely. The best way to get started with us is, first thing is to do a demo for our Compliance Hub. That's kind of our core product. I would say get on a demo, see what all we have, and then we will give the bank a free trial just to go in and use it themselves and kind of play with it and see how they can benefit from it. While they're on that free trial, they can use the hotline service, the review service, look at all the tools, everything we have, they have access to. We don't restrict it during that trial period. So that would be a great way to kind of get a good idea of what all we can do. If a bank has other needs, I mentioned giving compliance officers resources. If one of the banks is like, if I could give my compliance officer someone that could just clear BSA alerts, for instance, that would free up their time to focus on other things. Reach out to us. We have departments that can do that for banks and do other tasks. So, if you have a current need for something, not a full-time employee, but I just need to offload a project or something, reach out to us and talk to us about how we might be able to help you with that. Because a lot of times banks don't even realize that they can outsource something like that. So that would be the other thing is, if you have a compliance need, reach out and talk to us. We're happy to walk through what your needs are. If we can help you, we will tell you how we can help. If we can't, we'll tell you that and then maybe try to guide you in a way that could help you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott, for your time today and for providing all this excellent information for our audience. And additional information regarding compliance is available on KBA's website at kybanks.com. But that's all for this episode of KBA Vendor Viewpoint. Until next time, this podcast is a wrap. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for being